Shiva Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 17th of July of 2026. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first, let's talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, where during the previous 24 hours, lots of changes on the ground were recorded. So let's discuss everything in details. And first, let's talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction, where the Ukrainians, as a result of an offensive operation, managed to improve their positions to the south of the settlement of Stepnogorsk, and this is a very dangerous situation because the edge positions of the armed forces of Ukraine were discovered right exactly at this point, and here we can see how the Russians were attacking edge positions of the armed forces of Ukraine with artillery. According to this configuration of the front line, we see that the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions to the south of the settlement of Stepnogorsk, and it seems that now the Ukrainians are trying to cut the logistics and roads in the direction of the city of Stepnogorsk if there are still pockets of resistance from the Russian side. And from the other side, we see that the Ukrainians are trying to cut logistics of this citadel, of the southern citadel of the city of Stepnogorsk. We're talking about the third micro district. As you can see, there is a multi-story building area. Obviously, most of these buildings were damaged significantly during the previous phases of the battle for the western parts of the Zaporizhzhia direction, but anyway, there are still positions. So now we see that Ukrainians are trying to outflank this citadel and to cut logistics. As of now, the Russians show fierce resistance, and the Russians try to counterattack. And it seems that currently it's something like a decisive moment, and we will see who is going to win the battle for the western Zaporizhzhia direction. The Russians right now are tasked to stop the Ukrainians and first to slow them down, and then to stop, and then to counterattack and to regain the lost positions. As for the city of Orekhov, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians continued attacking and bombing the central part of the city using aviation, using artillery. The Russians continue softening the defenses of the armed forces of Ukraine through the city of Zaporizhzhia, but without changes on the ground. As for the eastern Zaporizhzhia direction, during the previous 24 hours, changes were recorded both in the Russian and in the Ukrainian favor. The Russians, according to pro-Russian sources, improved their positions to the east of the settlement of Dalinka. It seems that the Russians managed to cut the settlement of Dalinka in pincers, and most likely in coming days, the Russians will begin assault operation on the territory of the village with the purpose to force the Ukrainians to fall back further towards the settlements of Shiroka and Chervony Yar. In coming days, the clashes for this village will begin. As for the northern Zaporizhzhia direction, as for this territory, the changes were recorded mainly in Ukraine's favor. Let's talk about the territory of the river of Gaichul, and here we have changes, and these are the changes on the ground. This is, for example, the end of the 16th, this is the end of the 17th of July. It seems that this village like Bratska, Gerasimovka were recaptured by Ukrainians, because this information was confirmed by neutral and by pro-Russian sources. And today we received this video where we can see how the Russians were attacking with FPV drones logistics and reserves of the armed forces of Ukraine that were moving in the direction of these villages like Gerasimovka, Bratska, and Pishana. So the Ukrainians were moving in this area, and the Russians were attacking them with FPV drones, which means most likely that these territories are under complete Ukraine's control. As of now, we are not going to change the map until we get more proofs, but as of now, we have these territories as a gray zone. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the South Donetsk direction. We haven't been talking about the South Donetsk direction for a very long period of time, but now it seems that the Ukrainians are launching their counteroffensive operation with the purpose to improve their positions on the Russia side of the river of Volcha, and these are the changes on the ground between the dates. This is the end of the 16th of July, and this is the end of the 17th of July of 2026. As you can see, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions, and this information, which is very important, was confirmed by pro-Russian very reliable sources. And we have two videos. As for this, for example, the video from the area of the Andreevka-Klivtsova settlement, here we have Ukrainians were attacking positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, and then the Russians surrendered to Ukrainian forces that were moving in this area. Based on this video, we have adjusted the southern parts and the southwestern parts of the settlement of Andreevka-Klivtsova. As for the village of Ivanovka, we have a video where we we can see how Russians were attacking Ukrainians with FPV drones, so their edge positions through the northeastern parts of the settlement. So based on these videos, based on the reports published by different very reliable sources, we came to the conclusion that the Russians were forced to fall back from these territories towards the settlement of Zelený Gai, and now the Russians are trying to hold positions, because if Russians lose control over the settlement of Zelený Gai, the Ukrainians would be able to continue developing their offensive operation further in the direction of the village of Filia, and the Russians would be forced to fall back from the territories to the north of the river of Volcha. So we are talking about the villages of Filia and Novopavlovka, and it will cause significant problems to Russians, because the village of Novopavlovka is a very important village in the Dnipropetrovsk direction. So that is why the Russians most likely would try to regroup these days with the purpose to stabilize the situation and to slow down the Ukrainians. As for the Dobropolye direction, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received changes, but we received lots of videos where we can see how Russians were bombing villages like Dobropolye, Novogrishna, Vodyanska with aviation. So which means that the Russians continue softening defenses of the armed forces of Ukraine through these territory, probably before the beginning of a major offensive operation. As of now, very difficult to say when exactly the Russians are planning this major offensive operation, but one thing is clear: the Russians are going to hold elections in September of 2026, which means that the Russians most likely before the beginning of elections would try to establish complete control, or would try to get big results along the line of combat contact, to have results before election starts. Now let's talk about the Druzhkovka-Slaviansk direction. During the previous 12 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded on the outskirts of the settlements of Osikovo, Alexeyevo, Druzhkovka. These changes were provided by neutral mappers. The Russians began moving outside of the city of Konstantinovka in the direction of the village of Osikovo, and currently there are just 500 meters before the villages. So these are the distance. This is the distance between the city of Konstantinovka, more precisely edge positions of Russians, and the village of Osikovo, just 800 meters, and the Russians would be able to answer the settlement. According to pro-Ukrainian sources, first sabotage and reconnaissance groups of the armed forces of the Russian Federation have already entered the village of Alexeyevo, the village of Osikovo and the Alexeyevo-Druzhkovka agglomeration, but as of now, as of the end of the 17th of July of 2026, we still haven't received proofs about this. The Russians continue their offensive operation in the direction of Kramatorsk and Slaviansk, and this is a very interesting situation, because today several experts published a very interesting analysis, and according to the analysis, the Russians established control over elevations, over strategic elevations and hills. So the Russians controls the highest lines, the highest points to the east of the city of Kramatorsk and Slaviansk, which means that the Russians have a very good observation of both cities and of the entire Slaviansk-Druzhkovka agglomeration, and from these positions the Russians are able to attack the cities with artillery, with drones, and to control the situation. As for Ukrainians, they're located in the lowlands. They don't see and they don't control the Russians as the Russians can, which means that the battle for the Slaviansk and Kramatorsk and Druzhkovka could be finished much faster than expected. First of all, could be started much faster, and the Russians could develop their offensive and their positions much faster in comparison, let's say, with the cities like Chasiv Yar and Konstantinovka. As for the settlement of Nikolaevka, additional changes on the ground were recorded as well, and these are the changes between the dates. So this is the end of the 16th, this is the end of the 17th. It seems that the Ukrainians began retreating in the direction of the settlement of Nikolaevka with the purpose to hold the lines and not to allow the Russians to break through defenses. So the settlement of Nikolaevka is the last defense belt of the city of Slaviansk from the east. The Ukrainians most likely would try to hold these positions for as long as possible, because if Ukrainians lose control over the settlement of Nikolaevka, this is going to mean that the Russians answered basically the Slaviansk agglomeration, and then the Russians would continue offensive operation much faster than expected. So this is a very important and a vital battle both for Russians and for Ukrainians, because who controls the city of Nikolaevka probably controls the situation further in the direction of the cities of Slaviansk and and Liman. As for the city of Liman, we haven't been receiving anything for a very long period of time, and it seems that in coming days we won't see changes. The situation is quite difficult because when talking about the group of forces center and south, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly around the Slaviansk-Konstantinovka direction from the south, from the southeast, from the east, from the northeast. But when talking about the northern direction, we see that the Russians have problems. The Russians probably 4 months ago reported that just 149 buildings left before the end of the battle for the city of Liman, and almost a month passed and we see no progress on the ground, which means that either the Ukrainians counterattacked or the Russians decided to keep the situation in secret until, let's say, the beginning of the parliament elections campaign from the Russian side. Who knows? Anyway, we expect that in coming days we might receive additional changes and additional reports about the situation in the area of the city of Liman, but as of now we have nothing. Furthermore, we had reports that Ukrainians right now are trying to counterattack in this area, trying to force the Russians to fall back and to change their plans regarding the battle for the city of Liman. The Russians strike back, and for example, during the previous 12 hours, were reports that the Russians destroyed railway station in the area of the city of Izum and buildings in this area that Ukrainians were using as warehouses and ammo depots. So there are very heavy clashes through this territory, but we see that both the Russians and the Ukrainians are trying to keep this information, the situation in this area in secret. So that is why we don't know what is happening. But telling the truth, the southern Barovo pocket is one of the most powerful battles and the most probably decisive battles through the entire summer military campaign, and we have nothing about the situation in this area. The northern Kupiansk direction, the Russians improved their positions through the city of Kupiansk, and these are the changes on the ground. The Russians currently, according to different sources, control up to 80% of the city of Kupiansk. The Ukrainians, according to information we have, control just the southwestern parts of the settlement, but due to the current configuration of the front line, it seems that the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from this area in coming days. If Ukrainians lose control over the city of Kupiansk, then the Russians would be able to continue advancing further along R79 road in the southern direction with the purpose to establish something like a gap, something like a buffer zone along the river of Oskol on the Ukraine side of the river. If it happens, then the Ukrainians would have more problems with the eastern and the northeastern parts of the Kharkiv region, because if Russians are able to establish a strong foothold on the Ukraine side of the river Oskol, then using broad frontline attacks, the group of forces west of the armored force of the Russian Federation would be able to continue advancing further in the western direction towards the river of Seversky Donets and the Pechenegi water reservoir. As for the northeastern parts of the Kharkiv region, according to pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian sources, right now the Ukrainians are trying to concentrate significant number of forces through the most northeastern parts of the region with the purpose not to allow the Russians to establish complete control over the northeastern parts of the Kharkiv region. The Russians see the concentration of Ukraine's troops in this area, and that is why the Russians are bombing and attacking this territory with aviation and with artillery, trying to reduce the number of Ukrainian forces and positions and trying to soften Ukraine's defense. In coming days, we expect additional changes to the northeastern parts of Kharkiv region as well. As for the northern Kharkiv direction, these days we have changes on the ground between the villages of Goptovka and Zhuravlyovka, and these are the changes. The map has been adjusted based on this video published by pro-Ukrainian sources, where we can see how Ukrainians were attacking these facilities. Furthermore, the Russians continue offensive operation through the village of Kazachya Lopань. The battle for this settlement started almost a month ago, and we see, and most likely we expect that in coming days, the group of forces north will report about complete control over the village. As for the Sumy direction, during the previous 12 hours, we haven't received anything special. The Russians continue bombing positions of the armed forces of Ukraine to the south of the settlements of Hotin and Pisarivka, trying to destroy warehouses, logistics, and supply of the edge positions of the armed forces of Ukraine. Through the northwestern parts of the city of Sumy, another gas station was destroyed, and these pictures were published today by pro-Ukrainian sources. As we can see, the situation is quite difficult. The Russians are pushing along the entire line of combat contact. The Ukrainians are trying to counterattack between the cities of Orekhov and Gavrilovka Novopavlovka with the purpose to stabilize the situation in the Zaporizhzhia and Dnipro direction. Meanwhile, the Russians continue attacking Ukrainians and positions and logistics of Ukraine through the city of Odessa. During the previous 24 hours, lots of explosions were recorded, as well as lots of tanks. Lots of vessels and tankers were damaged by Russians. This evening, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that up to 10 vessels of Ukraine were attacked in the area of the city of Odessa. The Russians right now are trying to do the same thing as the Ukrainians are doing in the area of the eastern parts of the Black Sea, where the Ukrainians continue attacking vessels between the cities or between the territory of Russia and Turkey. In this video, we can see more vessels and more tankers that were moving between Russia and Turkey with drones. Lots of tankers and vessels, as you can see, were damaged. The Russians right now are trying to secure the eastern part of the Black Sea with drones, trying to seek and to destroy Ukraine's navy drones that control this territory and not allow the Russians to feel free through the eastern parts of the Black Sea. So as you can see, the battle for the Black Sea accelerates and intensifies. Meanwhile, a political crisis is brewing on the territory of Ukraine itself. During the previous 24 hours, there were at least 2 waves of protests through the city of Kyiv and different parts of Ukraine. Today, according to information we have, civilians and Ukrainians are going to start another protest. This time, they're planning to start this protest at 8 p.m. As of the moment when I started making this video, we haven't received anything on this matter, but probably people will start protest against Syrsky. We see that currently there is a very big media campaign against the commander-in-chief of the armed forces Ukraine at the moment when the Russians are trying to begin a major battle for the Slaviansk-Konstantinovka direction. The president of Ukraine, Zelensky, stated that he is not going to dismiss Syrsky, at least during this period of time. And when he made the statement that he's not going to dismiss Syrsky, we start receiving more updates from different pro-Ukrainian sources that lots of people, many people are planning to strike, are planning to protest today against the current situation. And you know that we see that the Ukrainian authorities doesn't understand the potential of the current protest, because we need to understand that during the protest period of time, nobody cancelled or nobody stopped the mobilization process, and we need to understand that when there are lots of people on the streets, especially on the territory of the city of Kyiv, and if somebody makes or creates the situation with, let's say, unsuccessful mobilization episode, this can lead to unpredictable consequences, and this can lead to thousands of people, thousands of Ukrainians on the streets of the city of Kyiv. So the situation is very difficult, and we need to understand that there are lots of powers, lots of third parties who are interested in both the negative mobilization process and protests on the streets of Ukraine. Because I would like to remind you that protest in 2013, when everything started basically like the same like we see right now. So there were unhappy people, but at the same time, at some point we saw a violence against protesters on the territory of the city of Kyiv, and this situation led to complete collapse of the former president Yanukovych, and everything is possible during these days as well. So let's wait and see how exactly the protests are going to take place starting from 8 p.m. of the 17th of July of 2026. Today we received also lots of very important updates about the visa factory. I would like to remind you that during the previous massive attack, the Russians attacked the territory and there were very heavy explosions, and today we received additional videos on this matter. In this video we can see how the Russians attacked the visa plant. As you can see, a very heavy explosion took place, and then we have more updates on this matter. We have lots of explosions, and the most important thing, we have missiles and we have rockets flying from the territory of this plant after the Russians attacked the territory. And later, more precisely this morning, we also received this video where we can see the consequences of attack. And as you can see, the plant itself, the enterprise itself, was reduced to ruins, and the most important is the territory around was damaged badly or even destroyed as well. So this is the situation. Furthermore, this evening we received the report that within the next 48 hours there are very high chances that the Russians may carry out a massive attack through the territory of Ukraine. The Russians may attack the cities of Odessa, Kyiv, Zaporizhzhia, Dnipro with hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles. So everything is possible during the next 48 hours, and together with protests on the territory of Kyiv, together with unwillingness from the side of the president of Ukraine to change the commander-in-chief of the armed forces in Syrsky, and this cocktail can bring to unpredictable consequences both for Ukraine and for the entire process of the special military operation. And that's it for today.